What we're going to see first is just 2.5 minutes of video from Nicola Menderson, who set up what I think is a very brave and innovative statement as her part of her presidency of the IPA to move the industry onwards. So if we can run that video, please.
Hello, I'm sorry I can't be with you today, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to contribute to the discussion. I think if we look at the agency world at the moment, I think it's important to think about it in the context of what's going on in the wider business world. And I think if we look outwards, actually there's three major forces that are impacting on the business as we see it today. There's the issue of globalization, which affords us huge opportunities, but also some challenges. There's the really difficult pressing issue of the economic situation, which certainly in the developed countries is really not looking like it's going anywhere fast. And thirdly, there's convergence, which is really being driven by digital and could really afford us some of the most exciting opportunities. So with that backdrop, and knowing that clients have their budgets squeezed harder than they've ever done before, what are the clues are there out there in terms of which agencies are benefiting from those three forces? One of the things that's been posed is whether we're actually going back to the whole full-service agency. And I think in some ways what we're seeing, if we look at some of the statistics, is that there certainly is a trend going in that direction. Now, what I don't believe is it will look like the days of Mad Men and Don Draper, but what I do think is that we'll see more services under one roof. If we look at the agencies in the UK today that are doing well, and if we look at Campaign's New Business League and examine the numbers there, over the last 5 years what we've constantly seen is that the smaller independent agencies are the ones that are really succeeding. And if we look at those agencies and we examine, I think it's really interesting to draw out some of the reasons why, and why it is that clients are choosing them. They're described as being agile, they're described as being integrated, they're described as being future-facing and very digitally orientated. And I think there's a lot of clues there that we should pick up on and think about how we can benefit as agencies going forward and as CEOs thinking about what we need to do to make sure that our businesses are fit for the future. And if we look back over the last 10 years at how the industry's already changed, our business is already littered, filled with people with job descriptions that we could never even have dreamt of. Mobile app specialists, who knew that there was going to be such a thing even 5 years ago? And I think keeping an open mind and being prepared to move and move quickly and to challenge our own internal structures, then I think we'll make ourselves fit for the future and really develop some of the most interesting, some of the most creative and some of the most unique work that we can give to our clients. Have a great day. Thank you.
The panel we have, I think, have got fascinating opinions and different points of view, which can really add to both Andy's point and Nicola's. So I'd like to welcome to the stage John, Steve, Nick and Martin. And I will just read their bios as they gently walk up. So John is managing partner of DARE. John's early career was in journalism, latterly as news editor of Campaign. He set up a digital unit at Motive and became director of Starcom. He was awarded Fellowship of the IPA in 2007. Steve Williams is CEO at OMD UK, who began his career in advertising at Bates. He is chair of the IP Media Futures Group and IPA Council member. Nick is managing director of McCann London and joined in December 2010 from AKQA. And Martin is general manager of Forward 3D, the fastest growing digital agency in Britain and pioneer of 3D search. So we're going to have a round of applause for the panel. So I want to field something to Nick first, and having just listened to Andy's keynote speech, talking about how the marketing model is changing. I think you'll have a really interesting perspective, having moved from AKQA to McCann. What must you do in your new role? Well, it's not so new anymore, but to help an agency keep pace with that change.
Yeah, I think Andy made some interesting points, and I think it's quite easy when we talk about technology and new ways of communicating and connecting with consumers to chuck out everything from the old, from the Mad Men years that Nicola touched on, which McCann actually is the original Mad Men agency, so it's quite funny. But I don't have whiskey and a big office, so unfortunately. So I think it's easy to chuck out the old when you're trying to integrate the new, but for me it's about the collision of the old and the new together. And the heritage of big advertising agency is that they are brilliant at understanding brands and telling stories and resonating with emotional connections with consumers. And you need to blend that with the new, which is, as Nicola mentioned, the agility of the smaller independent agencies where technology understanding, the creative use of technology is first nature for those agencies. So I think you have to blend the old and the new together. And with McCann specifically, there's 3 areas that that I feel we have to focus on if we are going to evolve and be relevant to brands moving forward, which is we have to look at the people and the talent that we have within the business. And that really, for me, is about having diverse, curious, brave, hungry talent in at ground level, day to day, working with clients. Secondly, the product that we offer, slightly controversial, but because I'm an MD of an advertising agency, but the best form of advertising isn't advertising anymore. And we have to acknowledge that and move from advertising to experiences, from interruption to engagement. And probably the last area is really the way we create work. And for me, I think if you are going to create different answers, you have to ask different questions up front. And I think Andy touched on it in his piece as well. You need a fully rounded view of the consumer. You need to change the way you plan and gather insights. You need to change the way you create your work. So for me, those are the kind of areas that I think the bigger agencies have to work through if they are going to be relevant and be able to serve our clients.
It's interesting when you talk about advertising. The best form of advertising is not advertising anymore. And I think I kind of want to take that to Steve to say that's fine when you're getting paid for ideas and whatever else. But if you're a media agency and sort of like you're used to sort of like putting in place lots of advertising spend, how have you evolved the model so that you are powered not just by booking space for advertising, but connecting people and companies?
Yeah, violently agreeing with everything that Nick's just said there. I guess for us, couldn't agree more fully with talent is everything, and I think increasingly culture is everything too. Unless we've got the right talent coming into our business and we are attracting it, we're retaining it, we're motivating it, then we're nothing at all. Structure is a little bit irrelevant for me, I have to say. It's important. Strategy is nice to have, but culture is everything, and it's talent that drives that culture. So unless we've got the right mix of people, the right blend of talent, and that we recognise that, and we are trying to get there. It's a job that will never be done, but we try and live up to it every day. It's now the case that the smartest person in the room isn't the most senior, and I think we all have to recognise that and let some of those people go a little bit, and we need to learn how to coach talent, I think, in that regard. So we're doing our best to understand every day the fundamentals of what it takes to get great work out, and that for me is what sums the whole piece up. How we can imagine what we can do, using some of Andy's words, I think is spot on. If you can imagine something today, you can almost certainly do it, or if you can't do it today, you'll be able to do it tomorrow. So I think that's quite a nice sort of mentality for our people to have. And I work in a big organisation, big locally and big globally. So what we're trying to do is introduce a sort of culture of entrepreneurship, to ensure that people feel comfortable in getting ideas out and being brave about some of that stuff. Unless we're getting ideas out, it's not happening for us. We do not talk the language of advertising in the agency at all. I don't want to get too caught up in the language. But we're in the business of, I guess, at worst, influencing behaviour and brands, but at best, which is where we think we should be, is looking after and nurturing brands, and we need to be living up and playing our part in that to brand owners and to other agencies along the way. So imagination's key as a mentality within the organisation, and collaboration is got to be there. I don't subscribe to the lead agency principle particularly. I think different agencies should lead along the way. I mean, we work with Dare to a very interesting extent. I think both agencies work from the point of view of we'll lead at the right point in time, so we're not precious about that territory, and I think that's really important. I suppose talking a little bit about structure, I have to say I think we can all learn a lot from the Googles and the Facebooks to some extent in terms of seeing what the future looks like in the image of their structure. We're going to be having engineers in our organisations very soon, as much as we have planners and buyers. So, I'd like to think that we can start to think quite expansively about what that means, but we need to be brave about doing that.
I want to take that to John, because also you're sort of like, you're almost coming at this from a different perspective, so to established agencies who are bringing in new talent. Are you, in this new model of Dare, you've recently merged with MCBD, are you almost sort of working out how to do the flip? How do you blend that existing cutting-edge talent with more established traditional skills?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose a couple of points that Nicola raised really are quite opposite to what we're trying to do and the conditions that we're trying to respond to. One is the need for brand building and the agency that's responsible for brand building to thoroughly understand digital, its implications for brands, and to have expertise in that field. So that's a desire, and I think most people were talking at lunch with some of the people in the audience, and I think clients generally get a feel that that's not there yet. It's not baked. That doesn't exist in truth to the extent that it needs to. So our solution to that was take a leaf out of Andy's book, really, leap in and merge with MCBD. So, we have brand building, above-the-line expertise and 10 years of digital expertise, now under one P&L, one agency, and delivering that kind of brand building service from a digital perspective. But the thing that's kind of quite headline grabbing and it kind of sounds quite easy to talk about and kind of makes sense, I hope. The stuff that goes on, the real hard work under the under the surface, as it were, is actually investing and continuing to invest in the specialisms that Nicola also referenced. So she talked about mobile apps. Who would have thought you'd have mobile app specialists? This world is changing so fast. Dare for 10 years, every 2 years we changed. We invested in something new. We invested in planning in 2003 when it became apparent that actually digital was becoming quite important to brands and we needed to take a strategic top table view. We invested in social media, we invested in mobile, and we continue to be on that mission and to invest in whatever we think the appropriate specialism is at a given moment, so that we are, within our agency, as good as any given specialist in a particular field. And I think that's really, really important to the model that we're looking to create. So having the ability to lead brands, but also in that process drawing upon genuine expertise from the various specialisms that we think are relevant to that business of brand building. And actually, in the context of sort of storytelling, one of the things that we take inspiration from in that whole process is Pixar and the way they create films. And Ed Catmull, the president of Pixar, is very eloquent on this subject, that, yes, a big idea for a film, the same as for a brand, is really, really important. But that's kind of when the hard work starts. And actually, a movie is not one idea, but tens of thousands of ideas. And those ideas in the world of Pixar come from people from all sorts of different backgrounds and all sorts of different disciplines. It's a really collaborative process, to build on Steve's point about collaboration. And they do that in their world. We do that in our world. And I believe having lots of different specialists within Dare, but also working collaboratively with other agencies, is absolutely key to building brands and telling brand stories over a long period of time.
Is the end goal, though, do you see a stage where you have everything under the roof that you could do?
I don't think that's realistic, and I don't think things are moving at such pace, and there are certain specialisms that it simply is not economic to have in-house. You have to select very carefully the bits that you are going to invest in. I mean, I don't think we will ever invest in media, for example. So we will always be in a position to work with and collaborate with media agencies and connections planning agencies. There may be other areas where there is crossover. And I think it's also very key that the client takes leadership where there is crossover and says exactly what you want or what the client expects from agency A and what he expects from agency B. Otherwise, obviously, we all know what happens. The infighting can be rife.
Yes. Well, taking this point about specialists to Martin, then, because you are a very good and fast-growing specialist, etc. Do you see your future in continuing to be in that specialism, or are you two looking to?
Yeah, it's quite a difficult question to answer in many ways. I think Nicola spoke about 3 themes, didn't she? So it was economic, it was globalisation, and what was the last one? Convergence, yeah. I actually think there's a far simpler theme, which is much more tangible to marketers out there, and that's how you buy media. As boring and as simple as that sounds, but biddable media has changed absolutely everything. So there are, fairly established models that you can look at when a new channel emerges. So when a new channel emerges, if you're an advertiser, you go to an advertising agency because they're the specialist and they can help you navigate this cool new channel. But then as that channel becomes a commodity, then you go to a big agency because they're going to buy at scale and they're going to get you economies of scale. I think with biddable media, those rules just go out the window, because there are no economies of scale with Google, not unless someone in this room knows something I don't. The driver of biddable media is data. And I think the shift that is going to happen is not that all of these disparate disciplines live under one roof and we all play nicely together. The shift that is going to happen is they all become biddable. And I think we're all waiting with bated breath for TV to become biddable. And when TV becomes biddable, I think the pivotal element in selecting an agency is who gets data and who can interface that data with biddable media. So it's a funny question to answer, are we all going to live together? I think what we're going to do is going to be very different, and data is going to be the key.
Yeah. It's really interesting notion of sort of TV becoming biddable, because everyone, if you look at the Yale Valley model, I think, so people will say, oh, we'll just buy the X Factor spot, and then everyone will see that and we'll do some stuff on YouTube. That's fine for advertisers for a while, but I don't think television channels can survive on that, not just on everyone bidding for the same spot and no one wanting the daytime stuff. So is there just thoughts on that? Sort of, how quickly do you think we might see something like that, or do you think television channels will be increasingly resistant?
Steve? I think, being frank, I think there's a vested interest in keeping the industry the scale it is at the moment. I think there are more efficient ways of us trading out the executional piece of media, there's no doubt. I don't disagree with the principle that sometime soon in the future everything will be automated. If you go to other markets, it's quite close to that. I mean, Holland are quite advanced in this area, for example. I think we, to some extent in the UK, resist it. When we go full-on digital, I think that will be an inevitability. I don't think we should forget that biddable TV is where we all started many years ago, called preemption. Wasn't automated, but it was the same principle, so it's not a new idea in that regard. Throwing Google into the biddable media piece is absolutely right from the search point of view, but biddable media and display digital is quite a small proportion at the moment. I'm not suggesting it isn't going to grow, and it's the tail at the moment, and it will move up through the dog of the body. But no, there's no reason why everything we buy couldn't be reverse auctioned, if you will. I do think, though, there will be a split between what is perceived to be quality. So in American language, there'll be a scatter market that will probably be biddable, and there'll be a quality end which will be their equivalent of the upfronts, no doubt, because individuals will need to buy it in that way. So I think it will be a mix of economy coming in, but I do see it coming in, yes.
Do you, Nick, so thinking about McCann, etc., would you, if that came in and that came in next year, are you ready?
I think for me, media is definitely one part of the question, but it's not a core competency of McCann. We'd obviously use Universal McCann, I'm sure Mark knows well. But for me, I want to take a step back from that and really talk about relevancy, because I think when you're talking about, we talked about message and media previously, about how they play off each other and whether they influence each other. I think for me, it's brands have to find a way of resonating emotionally with consumers, and there are certain media touch points that make sense to do that, and there's different ways of buying that and selling that and consuming that, and that's certainly a model that we're talking about. But I'm actually a bit more interested in the content, the idea, the story that brands will be putting out to consumers to enable brands to connect with consumers, but also allow consumers to connect with each other. And I think that's where we are moving away from passive one-way advertising into two-way interactive experiences of some way, shape or form. And I think that's what I want, certainly personally. I want McCann and the army of creative artists at McCann to focus on, to create engagement with for brands, with consumers. And whether that's a piece of utility, whether that's a piece of entertainment, the spectrum is wide, and it's exciting. I think Andy touched on it's an exciting time to be a marketeer, because I think we have so many opportunities to touch consumers in so many different ways. What media we use is certainly one part of the equation, but also just as important is what content, and I use that term loosely, will brands be putting out there. And it could be a piece of utility that Nike do very well, could be a piece of entertainment that we certainly saw Old Spice, do quite well last year on. So.
I think we kid, just to interrupt, Matt, I think we kid ourselves a little bit with the definition of disciplines within our world of marketing at the moment. I've spoken to creative agencies who think everything's media, and it all is. So I think increasingly we'll be talking about ourselves probably as marketing services agencies maybe in the future. that no doubt have some specialisms, and who knows, some silos within it too. But I'm not sure that it's all about what media is. I don't think there's any place, any agency can't go if it's got the right talent these days. I will draw the exception at creating the 60-second HD quality blockbuster ad, which there are many great big agencies doing brilliant work, and AMV BBDO is a terrific example of that particularly too. I don't think agencies are going to move into that territory if they're not in it now. But just about in every other territory, there's nothing stopping any agency, if it's got the right talent, moving into it. We could move into digital production. That stuff's not. I'm not saying we're going to go wholesale into it, but there aren't any boundaries anymore in terms of what we can do. We can build websites. Anybody here can do all of that. And to your point, when the final piece, the execution, if you will, if it does go demand side platform based, then scale becomes slightly less important in that. So, it might well be a much more accessible point for agencies that don't have the media scale at the moment.
That comes back to John's point about sort of the collaboration thing, that because there's this grey space, I feel that sort of like suddenly anybody could, and until you get a strong client leadership, everyone goes, oh well, we could all do that, so we all start fighting. Is there any advice you'd have for clients to prevent that?
I'm glad I've got a client at times. I tell you, it's very, very difficult because everyone claims to be able to do everything, and I think you do have to know what your competence is. And I think you do have to invest in talent and to be clear about what it is you do and what it is you don't do. So what it is you're perhaps bringing in third parties to do, what it is you're absolutely screaming to work with other partner agencies on, and what it is you feel you can actually deliver from within your four walls. I think there's too much at the moment of a land grab going on between agencies who can talk the talk but don't actually have the investment and the talent and the expertise to deliver.
I think if you think about it, it's about providing best of breed to clients. If you start lying about this stuff and saying you can do everything, if you base your life on a lie, it will unravel at some point. So you have to be honest about what your competencies are and what you're good at. And if you look at the back of sorry, Google, first of all. If you look at the back of this horrible phone, it's designed in California, built in China. There's a reason for that, because Apple want to control the design and the experience of their core product, but they're happy enough to say, you know what, we're going to allow the building and production of that to be somewhere else. And I think it's a similar model with agencies. They have to kind of admit what they can and can't do. And I would agree wholeheartedly with that. I think you have to just be honest about it.
Do you think there's more of an opportunity, though, for agencies and clients to work together to test things in smaller? So there's almost like people fighting for huge chunks of money, but I don't feel there's enough sort of like experimental and testing. Sort of like, here's a little bit, see what you can do with that.
So I think this is, again, an interesting shift about biddable media. So if media is biddable, you can buy just a tiny bit. And if you buy just a tiny bit, then you can launch lots of different creative in order to do it. And I think there's still within traditional media kind of hit and hope culture, which is why we're so wedded to these commercials like Smirnoff does, that are absolutely beautiful, that have amazing brand values. And we've seen some examples of ones that work, but there are plenty that don't.
Yeah.
And, being able to chunk out your media and control it should shift us to being much more playful with much lower production values and seeing what actually works. And I think that's quite scary for brands to do. We always say it forward that, perfect is the enemy of good enough. And we like things that are good enough. We like things that are half finished. Why? Because we don't claim to be able to predict the future, but we do claim to be able to measure the data that explains it.
It is that shift from sort of like agencies pontificating things in room for 12 weeks to sort of like, let's put it out and see. There's a great quote from the guy that founded Instagram that says, a day in the wild is worth a month of guessing. Because we're not at that stage, we can't guess.
It's actually, a lot of people have referenced content today, and as you introduced me as a former journalist, it's quite interesting when I went from the world of journalism into the world of agencies, because it's a completely different mindset. So in journalism, it's deadline culture. Everything has got, if it's not perfect, it's going. It's got to be, it's got to be on the newsstands on time. And in the creative agency world, it's ready when it's ready, And that was like, whoa, what's going on here? But we've got a deadline. When I first moved over, I found that really quite difficult to deal with. And I think now, as marketing becomes not just about the perfect 60-second ad that people are going to see 6 times and therefore has to be crafted within an inch of its life, into a world of content, into a world of much more diverse executions, actually those two worlds are beginning to collide. And I'm not saying one's right or one's wrong, but there is a coming together of those two worlds and a need, I think, for a bit of compromise on both sides.
It's sort of I think putting things, to your point, of good enough just in play, because I mean we heard something that occurred for the John Martin story we heard about the Moscow Mule. I obviously don't know the story as well as Andy does, but I would bet the farm that was one of 50 ideas he tried that year, and that was just the one that took off, and he can post-rationalise it into his awards speech or whatever that was. But it's that nature of sort of let's be a bit more experimental. Let's let those, if you still call them creators, whatever they call it, let's let them sort of try things that perhaps wouldn't get through.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting where we kicked off the panel. You said, how's McCann going to change from the old to the new? And I think there is a fear of technology within a lot of agencies. And when you're fearful, you tend to go back to what you know. So that stops people making mistakes and being brave enough to trial and error and put stuff out there, and maybe, like you said, it's not, but we know the Google beta program was a big reason for their success because they put stuff out regularly. So I think all agencies, no matter who's doing what, and that will change as long as it's best of breed, that's the right answer, need to be brave enough with brave clients, to be honest, because it works both ways, to be able to put stuff out there that will hopefully resonate on an emotional level with consumers. And I think that's a big part of our role as agencies, to lead clients through that quite saturated, confused technology world that we're living in at the moment. But it's exciting as well. There's a flip side of it. But you've got to be brave enough to put stuff out there and give it a go. So, yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay.
100%.
Well, to wrap up, because we have 3 minutes left, I kind of just want to take it to we talk about the future of agency model, but what thing in your experience, and we'll go from Steve downwards, I guess, what do you want from clients to help realise the best of the future of the agency model?
Just building off that last response to get into that question, I think agencies need to take a much firmer responsibility to bring clarity to the way they sell work to clients. I don't mean sell and leverage in, but I think we need to bring more clarity, and I think if we brought more clarity and a little bit more confidence, and we're being a little bit bolder about how we try to get a great idea through, I think we would have more success. So, clearly we'll all say we want braver clients, but I think agencies need to be clearer and more definitive about how they sell the work and be clear about what the business benefit is. So for me, the claim would be, or the call would be, can we continue to move ourselves away from a fixation as a media man from media metrics and get into business metrics to meet this whole big idea piece? Because I think one of the reasons there is a perceived lack of innovation out of the UK market, if you wanted to compare it with South Korea, parts of the States, to be honest, who've got a slightly more expansive view as well, then we are constricted by media metrics, and we've simply got to get out of that territory. So I would want my clients to encourage us, work with us to deliver on exactly what we want to do for their business, and we need to play our part in that and not fall back on a media metric.
Yep.
I think for me, the best way to predict the future is to actually invent it. And to invent it, you just need to be brave. And I think agencies need to be brave, but I would ask, whichever clients are out there, to let's be brave with whoever your agency is. Because I think that's the one word that, for me, will enable us to all, drive success for your individual brand. So for me, be brave and be relevant and create an emotional connection. And I think if we aim for those pillars, you'll genuinely be all right.
I think the changes that I'd like to see, if I could request changes of clients.
Christmas is coming.
I'd like to ban statements of work and SLAs because I think they absolutely destroy creativity and innovation, and you become a slave to them. I'd like to say that it's okay to change your mind every day because I think that's a good thing. And I would like clients to buy into the fact that perfect absolutely is the enemy of good enough, and they should put things out there that are half finished. That's what I'd like them to do.
I would say two things. Firstly, just from an internal perspective, kill the silos. Very easy to say, very difficult to do, I know. But I think particularly when you think about an area like digital, which is still new to a lot of businesses, having digital operate in a silo is a silo that is distinct from marketing is something that should be addressed. I know some businesses have done that, others have not. But the other, which is a much more fundamental thing, is share your agenda with the agency. And the more open the client can be with the agency about the personal agenda, but also, to Steve's point, the business agenda, the better the agency will deliver. And equally, the more the agency can open up to the client and open their doors and not make the creative department a mystery that no one can go into, but actually you come and sit at the shoulder of the creative team or the designer or whatever and say your point. I think the more we can work together in an open, collaborative and sort of transparent way, the better we will be.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to offer a huge round of applause to the panel. I hope you found that useful, interesting and transformative. Thank you. I'll take that with me.